Welcome, everyone. We'll go ahead and get started now. Thank you all so much for your attendance and thank you for being here.
Chris was talking.
I'm so sorry. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt your conversation. So first of all, welcome to our 2022 Rotary World Polio Day Luncheon and Initiative. We joined together today to help further promote the cause of polio eradication. And we want to thank those that are joining us here in person and those that are joining us through Zoom and YouTube. We especially want to thank the UVU Office of Global Engagement for sponsoring this event and allowing us to use this space. Through the inclusive co-curricular student engaged learning model, where students work as a group to solve real-world issues with faculty serving as mentors, students from Utah Valley University Rotaract, Utah International Mountain Forum, and UVU Public Health Department are pleased to be hosting this event for you all. As part of this model, we are honored to be joined today by our Orem Linden Rotarians, Orem Utah Rotary, and Dr. Johnson, and be sponsored today by the Utah Symphony. Together, we share our experiences and knowledge as an important part to help eradicate polio.
We are this close.
This close.
Two like models.
We are this close. This close to making this community.
This close.
Like this close, this close. We are this close.
We are this close.
This close to changing the world. We are this close to making sure no child suffers a chronic disease.
We are this close to making history.
We are this close to ending polio. We're this close to ending polio. We're this close.
This close. This close to ending polio.
This close.
We are this close to ending polio. All we need is you.
All we need is you.
All we need is you. Is you.
All we need is you.
This close.
If we don't act now, we may lose this chance forever. Help Rotary make history at endpolio.org.
Over the last 43 years, Rotary has spearheaded the fight to eradicate polio globally. From thousands of cases in 1979 to only a little over 400 polio cases of different variants are worldwide today. We are this close to fully eradicating polio. However, the fight is far from over and it's also closer than we think. In July 2022, the first US polio case since 2013 was detected in New York after almost a decade. Since then, there has been one severe case, 3 confirmed cases, and it's suspected to be present in hundreds of new cases. After almost being eradicated in 1955, the lack of polio vaccines has led to over 35,000 cases of throat paralysis within the US alone. Rotary International has worked for over 35 years to eradicate polio and donated over $150 million this year alone. This year, Rotary, they are the founding partner of the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, which has reduced polio cases by 99% since its founding. They have contributed to over $2.1 billion and countless person hours to protect 3 billion children in 122 countries. However, this effort must continue. If we stop pushing for a polio-free world, within 10 years, 200,000 children will be paralyzed every year. For the remaining of the event, we are grateful to have Lily Hall, a student of the UVU Public Health, along with Dr. Johnson from the Utah Valley Pediatrics, and Rachel Welker from the UVU Political Science to present for you all today. At this time, I will turn it over to our introduction of Lily Hall. Thank you.
Lily Hall is a public health student hoping to change sex education laws nationwide. Lily will graduate in 2024 and will go directly into an MPA program mixed with a doctorate. Lily has served the people of Nepal and other communities worldwide to advocate for women's education. She hopes to continue promoting women's education and change the laws to ensure the safety of the current and future generations. Thank you. I chose to study public health because I am passionate about women's health and the impact proper health education can have on women as well as children. On October 15th, I had the privilege of attending Utah's Rotary and Polio Now Gala, where President John Durham, Rotary International's past president, spoke about Rotary's role through global polio eradication initiative and the power one person can make. Through this, I learned the importance of widespread health care and health education. Polio remains endemic in two countries, Afghanistan and Pakistan. Until poliovirus is interrupted in these countries, all countries remain at risk. This is especially true of vulnerable countries with weak public health and immunization services who travel or trade with endemic countries. In recent years, this has led to 35 outbreak countries. These countries have stopped indigenous white polio, but are experiencing reinfection. There are also 8 key at-risk countries where low levels of immunity and surveillance leave populations vulnerable to an outbreak. As mentioned, the United States joined this list in June with a polio outbreak in New York. Gender roles, norms, and inequalities, along with other factors such as age, race, socioeconomic background, disability, religion, and caste operate as powerful determinants of health outcomes. There is a direct link between education and vaccines women and their children receive. According to the Global Polio Eradication Initiative, an essential part of reaching every child with vaccines is the last remaining polio stronghold is increasing women's participation in immunization activities. Since polio mostly affects children under 2, parents or caregivers are the critical decision makers for allowing child access to immunization. The type of decisions they make, their power and decisions, and their available resources to act on these decisions are all influenced by gender. Often, women lack transportation, money, time, and in some nations, the permission to act from their superiors. To receive this vaccine, especially when the immunization teams have male staff, the compounding of social and physical barriers for women in patriarchal societies constrains their capacity to provide health care to their children. Mothers are at the intersection of 2 conflicting sets of demands. On one hand, they are seen as responsible for their child's care, including health. On the other hand, they may lack the resources or autonomy to seek out health care. Mothers who perceive spousal permission is required for their child's immunization are less likely to immunize their child fully. It isn't just polio eradication that is negatively impacted by social and physical barriers. Laws surrounding sex education also negatively affect these women, even within the United States. Currently, only 18 states require educators share information on birth control. Only 13 states require that sex education to be medically accurate, and only 37 states require sex education in schools. Not only is health education important, but it is essential for teens to be equipped with the power and knowledge it can bring. A lack of education is forcing teens to seek information from pornography, social media, and friends. These resources are not accurate or realistic representations. Rural mountainous regions, both locally and globally, are especially affected by the lack of information. Until accurate information and resources are given to all of these areas, healthcare and vaccination rates will continue to be inefficient. Until polio has been completely eradicated, all countries remain at risk. The best way for countries to minimize the risk and consequences of polio infection is to maintain strong population immunity levels through high vaccination coverage and strong disease surveillance to detect and respond to polio rapidly. I want to thank all of our Orem Linden Rotarians. Without your support and the contributions of past Rotarians, polio would truly not be what it is today. Your efforts and dedication is at the heart of Rotary International is in and truly embodies Rotary's model of service above oneself. As students and future leaders, educators, and healthcare workers, we have the opportunity to bring down these causes to the forefront and now and in the future. Thank you. Thank you, Lily. Next, we have the opportunity to hear from Dr. Joseph Johnson. Dr. Johnson was born and raised in Provo. He attended BYU for undergraduate majoring in molecular biology. He attended medical school at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia, completed his pediatric residency at the Children's Hospital of Colorado. Since 2005, he has run a private pediatric practice in Provo. He is also the medical director of the Well Newborn Nurseries at Utah Valley Hospital and Orem Community Hospital. He is married with 4 children and loves all things outdoors, especially when his family is with him.
I can't find my pen, but sometimes if I have my pen, I can't find where it is. So I'm grateful. Thank you for the invitation to come today and to speak with you about something that I'm passionate about as a pediatrician. One of the main things that we do in our practices to provide immunization services to children and often to adults as well. So this is a really near and dear thing to me, and I appreciate Lily getting started with this. And I'm going to kind of build a little bit upon a little bit of what Lily said related to polio, but I wanted to broaden it out a little bit first and talk about immunization in general and a couple of things that help us to understand why it's so vital for populations to be immunized as a whole, as opposed to individual people. That's important in both the population, but there's population things that we need to talk about today as well. So just really quick, a history of vaccines. So most people are familiar with this story. Dr. Edward Jenner in 1796, who's an English physician, who noticed that milkmaids who milked the cows would get these sores on their hands from that, which was related to a virus called the vaccinia virus, and the disease is called cowpox. And he noticed that the milkmaids that were infected with cowpox did not get smallpox by and large. Over a period of about 20 years, he realized that even the milkmaids knew this as well, and so they would say, "Yes, I got cowpox. I'm not going to get smallpox anymore." So he decided, and this would never happen nowadays, but it did in 1796. But he decided that he would test this out. So he found a patient whose name was James Phipps, who was 8, and what he did is he actually took somebody who had a cowpox lesion and he took it off. He got some of the pus, and then he lanced this young boy's arm and he stuck the pus in the open wound. Again, this would never happen nowadays, but it did back then. So 6 weeks later, and then again, this really wouldn't happen now, but even more so, he exposed James to smallpox the same way by taking a lesion, a little lance in James's arm and putting the smallpox in there. But he didn't get sick. And over the next 2 years, he followed 23 additional patients that he either did the same thing to, or that he knew were infected with smallpox without him doing it. And were infected with cowpox, and none of these people got smallpox. So he published a paper at that time, and his conclusion was that the cowpox protects the human constitution from the infection of smallpox. And interestingly, as far as the nomenclature of vaccine comes from this virus, the vaccinia virus. And about that time, multiple countries decided that they would call these things that we give to each other to prevent us from getting sick vaccine. But it's related to this vaccinia virus. Vax in Latin language means cow. So that's where it comes from.
It means what?
It means cow. Vax like a vaca in Spanish is cow. So that's where vax comes from, but it was called a vaccine because it was related to the vaccinia cowpox virus. So kind of a fun historical note about that. So these are the vaccine preventable diseases for children. So again, I'm a pediatrician. There are other vaccines that are given as well to adults, but I'm a pediatrician, so I'm just gonna show you the ones that we give in our office. This is according to the time and the age that we give them, starting on the left. The earliest one given hepatitis B, which is given generally right after birth. And then starting at 2 months of age, other vaccines all the way up till children are 18, 19 on our office. We give these meningitis vaccines and some boosters or some of the other ones. Excuse me, you'll notice outside of the main common ones, we know about the flu shot. And we'll talk about that a little bit later on as well. And then recently with the COVID-19, there's a COVID-19 vaccine as well. And so that's given in our office as well, but it's not necessarily in the routine schedule that we have as an outside and one that we were trying to encourage people to get as well. Okay, so I wanted to go over some kind of vaccine science to help you understand the importance of, again, populations being vaccinated. So let's start by number one, the vaccines are probably one of the most successful interventions in medicine that have been made ever, but particularly within the last 100 years. And if you can look at pre-vaccine era, morbidity means how many people got sick. It doesn't necessarily mean that they died, but how many people got sick. And so the common vaccines that we give here, I'm just going to pull out my favorite one, which is measles, and we'll talk about that in a second why. So pre-vaccine, this would have been before the 1950s. There were 530,000 cases. Does anybody here have measles? I'm just curious. Okay. At some point, not the vaccine, but the actual disease. Okay. So my generation.
In fact, doctor, I think some of us, older ones, our parents made sure we got measles.
Yes, they did. We don't do that anymore. I don't recommend those parties. But you can see 530,000 people pre-vaccine era that got measles. This was from 2007 to 2010. That number has dropped to 61. Unbelievable. If you look at over here, the percent decrease for all of these vaccines, I'm going to go over all those in more detail, but any intervention where you have a 99 to 100% for most of these, that's a pretty amazing intervention to have something like that. Go to the next slide. This one has to do with the same statistics as before, but it also adds deaths as well. So if you look at, this was an annual average pre-vaccine, 1,800 people died of diphtheria prior to vaccination. And in peak years, which in this case was 1936, it would be almost double that had died. And if you look at all of these, I counted these all here, and there's about 10,000 deaths per year of all of these particular diseases. And if you calculate that over about 100 years, that's 1 million deaths that have been saved related to vaccines, which is pretty amazing. So again, deaths now post-vaccine going from 1,822 to 0. I don't even know what diphtheria looks like because I've never seen it before. I have seen measles. I've seen pictures of mumps. We still see pertussis, but we'll talk about why here in just a minute.
Is that whooping cough?
Whooping cough, yes. Polio, 0. Rubella, 0. Congenital rubella syndrome, 0. Smallpox, 0. Tetanus, a few, but very, very, very few. Again, can you imagine an intervention that could go from this to that more successfully? It's unbelievable how successful these have been, and how much they've made a difference in our society. Okay, so let's talk about herd immunity. Everyone talks about this big buzzword with COVID. We're going to kind of go over it and explain what it means. So your herd is your population. Okay, in this particular population, as you can see, there are the blue, which means that they're not immunized, but they're healthy. There are the red, which are sick, and they're the ones that are contagious that can spread those particular diseases. If no one is immunized people are yellow. If no one is immunized, eventually almost everybody is going to get the disease. If you have a few people that are immunized, those people will not get the disease, but still most of the rest of the population will get the disease. But if you have most of the population immunized, there's no place for the disease to spread. It has to go through this yellow person to get to this blue person, and has to go through this yellow person to get to this blue person. And so you're going to have much less spread of disease if the herd is immunized, because the herd can't spread the disease because they've been protected against it. Okay? Any questions about that? All right, we're going to go on with this. So this is an important thing, and some of you may have heard this. This was the big thing again that came out with COVID. R0 basically says how contagious are these diseases. And so basically what R0 says is if I'm sick, how many people am I going to infect with my sickness? So in the case of mumps, their R naught is 4 to 7, which means that I'll infect between 4 and 7 people. As you go down this list, you can see the more contagious diseases. Pertussis and measles are the most contagious diseases that we deal with. And they have an R naught of 12 to 17 and 12 to 18. Pertussis, measles has actually kind of been known classically as the most contagious disease ever. And so on average, 18 people are going to be infected from one case of measles, as long as you're not immunized. You're immunized, it's different, but if you're not immunized, we're going to be. So these things can spread like wildfire if people aren't immunized around the person it happens. We'll come back and talk about this in just a second, but let's go to the next slide. Here is some diseases that we know in the R naught and kind of showing along a timeline. So flu in general has an R naught of 2, which means that for every person that gets flu, they're going to infect 2 other people. COVID, the original strain, which is the alpha strain, has an R naught of 3, so it's a little bit more contagious than COVID, than flu, excuse me. The Delta strain, which was one of the other main strains that everyone hears about, had an R naught of 7, so that's quite a bit more contagious. Does anyone have any idea what the Omicron strain is? It's not on here, but it's actually 18. It's probably more contagious than measles, which is why everybody got Omicron this past summer.
But is it as dangerous?
Not as deadly.
Okay.
So we substituted not as bad for more people getting sick, which means that there still were a lot of people that got really sick with it,
But not as many.
but not as many percentage wise, but there were still a lot of people that got sick from it.
Then are you immunized from the other strains?
No, it's like flu. Flu changes every year, and these change every year. Measles doesn't change. Mumps doesn't change. Pertussis doesn't change. But these other ones, the way their genetic material works, they actually change.
That's why they have a new flu
That's
shot.
why I have an
every year.
ongoing, correct. When we have an ongoing issue like that, they change the shot to try to mimic what's circulating right now. Okay, again,
I got the
measles here.
COVID shot yesterday. So would it have been Omicron or would it have been?
You would have got some of the alpha strain, which was the original strain that's put in the old COVID shot, and then some of the Omicron strain, which is it's called
This is my
Bivane.
fourth, this is my second.
Yeah,
booster.
I had mine too. Okay, all right, so that's another illustration. Again, measles, most contagious disease known to man, with the exception of now, the Omicron strain of COVID. Okay, next slide. So why does this matter with R naught and herd immunity? So we're gonna put these two together now, okay? So let's say nobody's vaccinated. Again, blue means no vaccination, and susceptible, but not sick. If the R naught is 2, meaning it's a little bit contagious, you're gonna get, eventually, everyone's gonna get it, because no one's vaccinated against it. But if you vaccinate with an R naught of 2, you're gonna get a few cases, but eventually, you started with 1 and they ended up infecting 4 other people over time. But everybody else, because they're immunized, prevented it from going to other people. If it's more contagious, R naught is 5, that one person eventually can infect, this is 15 or 16. So when you have a herd that's immune, it protects people, but if the disease is very, very contagious, it's not going to be enough. But if more than 7, I don't have anything beyond this, but if more than 75% of people were vaccinated, there would be very, very few cases, even though the disease itself is very, very contagious. So does it make sense with herd immunity and vaccination and the herd and the R naught? Let's go to the next slide. Does it kind of go back again?
Quick question. So do you think like, my mom's at assisted facility and it just goes it down again? Because are we getting more and more of this because people are just like, man, I don't care if I get sick.
So remember that vaccines are kind of the victim of their own success. You think about it, we were having 500,000 cases of measles every year. Now there's 60. No one's seen a case of measles ever in their life. When we used to have 1,800, 2,000 people dying per year, now we have 0. So they don't see any problems with this. They forget that if we don't vaccinate, these diseases are still out there. They're around. They're going to circulate again.
What's going up? People are just aren't getting vaccinated.
Right, they're not getting vaccinated. So this is really important for these more contagious diseases. So remember, pertussis, measles are more contagious. You can see there's a trend for this is how much of the herd needs to be vaccinated for herd immunity to be successful. So in something that's not as contagious, you get by with maybe 3/4 of the population being immunized. if it's something like measles that's super, super, super contagious, you gotta have a higher percentage of the population immunized for herd immunity to work. So for instance, with the Omicron strain and an R naught of 18, we don't have anywhere close to this, which means we don't have anywhere not even close to herd immunity with that.
No, we are.
Probably not even 30. With the new, I guess with the new one, 20, 30, probably 60, 50, 60% with the old one. So we're not even close to having enough people immunized against this to stop the spread. So herd immunity and R naught are related to each other. And the more contagious something is, the more percentage of the population needs to be immune for us to get herd immunity. That's really important. And one of the most important things I can emphasize when I'm talking about today. Okay. So when we don't have herd immunity and we have pockets that are not immunized, we get outbreaks. So again, measles, whooping cough, the most contagious diseases that we know. This is from 2014. Huge areas of measles. Measles is the one that's always talked about because it's the most contagious and it's the one that spreads the most. But whooping cough, one of the problems with whooping cough is the shot is not as effective as the measles shot is. So when you get a measles vaccine or you get a disease of measles, your protection is like 98%. It's not that with whooping cough, which means that there's breakthrough cases even in people that are immunized because the immunity goes down all the time. So boosting is really important.
Are they not as severe then?
No, they're just as severe.
Oh,
I've seen new, and the main issue with whooping cough is babies. Babies die from whooping cough. They get pneumonia, they end up in the hospital, and they don't get immunized fully until they're from whooping cough until they're 18 months old. Because they have to get all the boosters. So people, they're adults, their immunity to whooping cough goes down, they get sick, they pass it to one of their grandchildren or somebody else in the neighborhood, and that child ends in the hospital and someone dying.
Oh, if people say, well, I already have it, so I don't need to get it, I don't need to get immunized. Because I
Depends on
had
what
that
you-
on.
It depends on what you have. We know that the immunity goes down over time. That's why they do boosters. Because our immunity, once we've had it, doesn't stay at a high level. And depending on how sick we were with it, sometimes we don't have a huge response to it.
Okay.
So you have to, we know pretty well what kind of a response you get from the vaccine because it's been studied. We don't really have as much, we don't really understand as well how much you get immune to it based on the disease itself.
How does the number of like herd immunity correlate to the number of strains of the virus?
It depends on the virus. The virus has the capability of doing that. So generally what happens if the herd immunity is bad is that whatever strain is out there is going to be able to multiply and populate. It won't necessarily result in cures. Except when we talk about this with polio. We're getting to polio. I promise we're going to get to polio.
I have a question of my father. He had COVID, he got the monoclonal antibodies. And it perked him, he changed him overnight, and then I just boosted him yesterday. Is he gonna have a longer, because the antibody was his,
No, because the antibodies are gone.
oh, they're gone?
They leave after about 9 months. So they're not, there's not long-term immunity. It's called passive immunity. I think you're giving them something that's going to help them for the present time, but it has nothing to do with long-term.
Okay.
All right, here's again another indication of measles, same year. You can see huge amounts in certain parts of the world, China, Philippines, but even in the United States, there were 644 cases. Next slide. We're gonna go through pretty fast. This is Europe, a couple of different outbreaks in different areas. Ukraine is a big problem for outbreaks for whatever reason. It's not, they don't do as good a job of immunizing there. So they have a bigger problem. So it's out there, it's around the world. And then one more. And then here, even in the United States, we're not protected by it. Then 2014, 667 cases, 2019, 695 cases. So we still get outbreaks in pockets of areas where people aren't immunized very well.
Because of,
And it's measles especially is because it's so contagious that unless the herd is immune, it's gonna spread.
so a lot of kids got behind in their childhood immunization.
Okay.
So do you expect a huge
We're
outbreak?
very worried about that.
You are, okay.
Yes, we are very worried about that. Right now, we haven't seen it, but we are very worried that it could happen.
So are you fearing whooping cough?
All of
measles,
those things.
all-
We still, I see whooping cough every time. Measles, I've heard of a case of measles in Utah with a partner of mine, but I haven't actually seen it myself. Whooping cough, we see every year, even now.
The chair of
Yeah.
You saw the kid from Mountain View?
Yep.
Yeah.
So it was.
Yeah.
It's
He was
Dr.
old enough-
Hacking.
yeah, Dr. Hacking, yeah, he was old enough to have seen it.
Yep. And thank goodness they came to him, because I mean, I would have recognized there was a problem, but I would have taken a while to pick up. So, okay, so let's talk about poliovirus. This was, I know this is with the polio day, so I want to talk about this. Okay, so polio is an RNA virus, which is dependent genetic material. It has, there are three types, type 1, type 2, type 3, super medically complex, type 1, type 2, type 3, type. Okay, the way it's transmitted, usually it's spread within about 3 to 6 days. It's spread fecal oral, which means from the poop to the mouth, or oral from someone's mouth to someone else's mouth. So in areas where there is poor sanitation and other parts like that, these are areas that are much higher risk of developing polio, because the spread is much easier. People that have polio can shed the virus for 6 weeks in their stool. So just because you don't have symptoms anymore, or you never had symptoms, doesn't mean that you're not spreading. This is going to be an important thing when we'll talk about the New York case here in a few slides. I know you wanted me to talk about that, so I found some information. So interestingly, with polio, 75% of polio, people that have polio actually are asymptomatic. 3/4. And they can still spread it, but they don't know that they have it. 25% of people have flu-like symptoms, and we'll talk about what those are in just a second. Only 1% have paralytic polio, which is what we all worry about with polio. But if you think about decades ago, that's a lot of people that are getting paralyzed because of polio, because it was so prevalent. Okay, next slide. So symptoms, what are these flu-like symptoms? Fever, back pain, muscle aches, abdominal pain are the most common ones. Those are very non-specific. I hear kids coming in every week with those symptoms all the time. Okay, that's the first week. After the first week, again, 1% of people will go on to have other symptoms, which are the ones we worry about, and I'm losing my light. Paralytic polio. So it destroys motor neurons in your spinal cord, which makes it so that you can't use the muscles in your legs, particularly are the biggest area involved. One of the other areas that's a problem, though, is the muscles that we use to breathe between our ribs to help expand our lungs and contract our lungs, and contract our lungs. Those can be affected as well. When that happens, go ahead. You go in an iron lung. The reason for that is because you can't expand your chest to allow air to go in. You can't push it to let the air go out. So this machine does it for you. This is obviously a very old picture. They still use iron lungs in people that have paralysis from whatever. Today, they're much more sophisticated, but the principle is still the same. Still the same principle. You can see he's totally happy. He's actually being fed just fine, but he can't breathe without this thing helping him breathe. So it's a pretty
Are they
miserable.
there permanently, or is that just for a while, like in
The
and out?
paralysis is permanent. The degree of the paralysis can be helped by treatments, which would include things like physical therapy and stuff like that. But you don't get 100% better from it. Okay, next one. Okay, so polio is a virus. There is no antiviral treatment for it. The treatment again are therapies, so feeding therapy, physical therapy, other things like that can help with that, massage, other things. But how do we prevent it? We prevent it with vaccination. So polio vaccine, there are 2 polio vaccines that are used even today. The first is the Salk vaccine. The way I remember learning it in medical school is Salk ends with a K, which means killed. So a Salk vaccine has been inactivated or killed. So the virus itself you can't get polio from the Salk vaccine because it's killed. Developed by Jonas Salk, released in 1955. It's an injection, which means that it gives you immunity in your blood, but it doesn't give you immunity in your gut. The way we get polio into our system is through our gut. We ingest it, and then it crosses into the blood from there. So it's actually not as good an immunization as the other immunization, but I'll talk about why we use it. So in the United States, it's the only one that's been given since the year 2000. Before that, they would give oral or injection, they're considered equivalent to each other. Because it's a killed vaccine, a killed virus vaccine, you can't be spread from person to person. Once you get it, it stops with you because there's no virus. But it's very, very, very effective. So after 2 doses, 90% protective. After 3 doses, 99% protective, and that's supposed to be 1 time. We give 4 doses. We give 1 to 2, 4, 6 to 18 months, and then 1 to 4 to 6 as administered. So we are above 99% protective with regards to what we're doing in the United States. The Sabin vaccine was developed by Albert Sabin. It was released in 1961. It is called a live attenuated vaccine, which means it's a weakened strain, but it's a live virus. And because of that, it can be spread from person to person, just like any other virus. So people that get this vaccine, they end up pooping it out and it goes to other people. And that was actually in the design of the vaccine to do that, because it's a much better way of getting it into a population and spreading it around the population so that everybody can become immune to it. And because it's a weakened strain, you don't get sick from it.
So if you're infected by that weakened strain, then you have the weakened
Strain,
strain.
and you'll get the antibodies against it and you'll become protected as well. There's a problem with that, and we'll talk about it in a second, okay? So it's given, so it provides both blood and gut immunity, which means that it's a better vaccine because it prevents the virus from even getting into your system. And then once it gets into your system, your antibodies kill it. So it's a double whammy towards the virus. Given orally, the reason that this vaccine is used throughout the world is because it's really cheap, very easy to administer. It's done with drops or sugar cubes or other ways. It's used for mass vaccination campaigns. It's a great place. This vaccine is expensive because it's given by injection, which means you have to have somebody who knows how to give shots. That costs money, and it costs money to preserve and all these other things like that. This one can be given by people that don't have a ton of training. All they have to do is learn how to give drops to people. It's much faster to give it all over the place, and it doesn't require nearly as much overhead related to it as well.
But
This
this
is
is the
what's
one on the left is the one that we do.
we use this one because we're in the United States, so we have money. We have the ability to do those kind of things. Other countries in the world use this one, and this is what's been used to help eradicate polio generally throughout the world because it's so easy to do.
Wasn't there like a wild polio strain or
We're
something?
almost there.
Okay, sorry.
I know enough to be.
Here's the problem with the Saban vaccine, because it is still a virus that's still alive. There is a possibility that it will revert to its full strength virus in populations that are under immunized. If everyone is immunized against it, this doesn't happen. But if there's a big pocket that's unimmunized, then it can revert to its full strength again and cause the full blown paralytic polio. That's why we don't use it in the United States.
So it's the Saban vaccine, the one that.
Yes, if you got drops or a sugar cube or whatever, you got the safe vaccine. Okay, all right, next slide. Okay, so in 1988, the World Health Assembly set a goal of polio eradication. That's why we're here today. These are countries. The United States was declared polio free in 1994. Others throughout the world declared polio free at other times. This is an old slide. It ends in 2018. Right now, next slide. There are only, as was said before, there are only 2 countries that still have wild type. Wild type means the actual polio virus not related to the vaccine, which are Afghanistan and Pakistan, these red dots here. This is from the World Health Organization. This is from my class. Okay, all these other right here are what are called vaccine-derived polio virus, or VDPV, which means that it's an area where they were giving the polio vaccine, the Saban polio vaccine, and because there were pockets that weren't immunized, there wasn't enough herd immunity, the virus mutated and it was able to become a full strength polio virus again.
So the yellow one is called wild.
No, the
Is
red,
that, okay.
yellow means this is the country that still has wild.
Wild is means it just came, it wasn't.
It's
from
the regular
So
polio virus.
It's called wild.
Yes.
So you want to just.
The original.
Yeah.
So these are all vaccine-derived poliovirus, and they can still spread. They can revert to their full strength. They can spread to other people, and other people can get polio if they're not immune. But if there's good herd immunity, it doesn't happen.
So the red down in Africa,
I don't know why they never mentioned. This is confusing to me as well, because that means wild type. They must have tracked them to up here somehow. If it wasn't endemic to this particular. This is Mozambique and Malawi. But they must have come from up here somehow, because they didn't comment that this is an area that still has wild polio. So they had to track it from up here somehow. These are the only 2 areas in the world that are known to have wild polio. Okay, so there's a big problem in Africa, little problem here. Look at this tiny green dot up here. Where's that? New York City, right? All right, next slide. We're almost done. Okay, so polio in New York, July 21st, 2022, there was a report from Rockland County, New York, of an unimmunized young adult, again, unimmunized, who developed fever, stiff neck, abdominal pain, and muscle aches. What does that sound like?
Well,
Any virus, could be anything, right? But in this case, 3 days later, he developed leg weakness and he presented in the emergency room, and he was admitted his weakness got worse. Anytime somebody, so there are other viruses that can cause weakness and paralysis as well, but there's a common one right now, which is much more common with polio, called enterovirus, E68. Over the last couple of years, there's been a big outbreak of this particular virus causing this it's called flaccid myelitis, which is paralyzed from
In the US?
it. But every time somebody has flaccid myelitis, they send a big panel of viruses that can cause it, including the enterovirus E68, and they always send polio. But until this time, the polio virus never was positive. Except in this case, so this person had not traveled recently outside the United States. It was positive for the type 2 vaccine-derived poliovirus, which is the most common vaccine-derived poliovirus that's there. And again, it's reverted to its full strength. He eventually improved enough that he could be discharged to a rehabilitation facility. He was not normal. He was still paralyzed, but he was functional enough that they could discharge him. Okay. So what do they do in this situation is they do wastewater surveillance. You probably heard about this from COVID. And that's because it's excreted in the stool. So if they can find it in the wastewater, they know that it's in the community. So they did it Rockland and then about 3 or 4 other surrounding counties. They identified 70 samples that were positive for poliovirus. And 63 of those were genetically linked to this particular case. So
Is there a hypothesis of how he got it? That's not meaning.
I haven't read anything. I don't know that anyone. But they know that he got it from the community because it's in the community based on the wastewater sample. So it may have been somebody else who traveled one of these countries and brought it back, but didn't have any symptoms because 70% countries don't have symptoms. Right now, they haven't been able to identify wastewater samples. They're not connected to anybody. They're just samples from the wastewater. So they're in the community, but we don't know who. If anybody's ever seen the movie Outbreak, have you ever seen that movie? It's good.
How long does it live? Like, it's just, how long is the? is it like
On surfaces, I don't know. Probably. Remember, viruses can't live for very long on surfaces because they have to live inside a cell for them to be. So probably less than a day is my guess. But if somebody gets it during that time, it stays in your body because it's in your cells already, so it has a protection.
So why would the health department, we're concerned, didn't immunize in decades, but the health department in New York, are they trying to get more polio into creating an herd immunity? Because if this is a
So
vaccine derived
So
one.
what they are doing with this is they're making sure that everyone out there, like they have this huge conference for pediatricians and other providers to make sure, hey, get your polio. If somebody is like a healthcare worker or they work in a lab that might be exposed to polio, they're actually recommending that they get another booster dose of polio, which they consider after 18, that's considered a lifetime. But before then, before these things happen, just the ones that we got when we were younger is considered lifetime immunity against polio. Okay.
You would think they could get samples from different parts out of the sewage system and they can track it down, but is that kind of like a needle in a haystack?
Again, the problem is that it all gets mixed together, so that they can't identify unless they went to every single house and
Like
tapped
tapped
in.
down, so they get kind of binary
They haven't
sort.
They haven't done that yet. They just know that it's in the mixed elements. I don't know how well wastewater samples do that. That's probably would take a lot more money than most wastewater samples that people have. Okay. So a couple things, I think this is the last slide. Go to the last slide. Okay, go back to the other slide. This is my last, but I want that to really be big. Okay, so a couple things. So number one, vaccinations probably are almost guilty or are almost a victim of their own success. Because these diseases are not seen anymore, people don't realize the importance of vaccination. But if we stop vaccinating people, the diseases would come back and would be just like we were back in the 1940s. Number two, it's really important, especially with the more contagious viruses, that the herd be immunized. Because if the herd's not immunized, the diseases can spread. And in the case of polio, the vaccine actually can revert to the full strength polio and cause real polio disease instead of doing what it was designed to do. That was actually planned for it to be that way, to spread from person to person, because if populations are immune, it's actually a very, very effective way to prevent problems from happening. But if the population is not immunized, it doesn't work, and then you end up with problems. And then as a last encouragement, Please get your full stop. This is from 2018. Estimated 49 million illnesses, 960,000 population, 79,000 deaths. If only 40%, that's not even close to herd immunity, but even 40% decreases the number of cases by 7 million, hospitalizations by at least 10%, and deaths by 8,000. Any death that we can prevent is worth preventing. That's all I have.
Well, so sorry, I just want to thank you for your time. We have that. I know you want to. Yes.
Thank you again. I really appreciate it.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Dr. No. We have one more presenter. Her speech is really, really short. I'll need to, wait for just a minute.
Next speaker is Rachel Walker, and she is the current vice president of the Foreign Affairs Club here at UVU. She's pursuing a bachelor's degree in political science with an emphasis in global politics and a minor in national security studies. Since high school, Rachel has sought opportunities to volunteer in her global and local communities. Her volunteer work has taken her to Peru and Mexico. She currently volunteers with the Judicial Procedural Evaluation Commission.
Hello, I'm so excited to speak with you today. So I'm Rachel, as she said. So World Polio Day is October 24th, which is actually my birthday. So I'm really excited about this connection. I really believe that like personal connections help us propel causes forward. So my hope today is that you'll find your personal link that will help you in funding World Polio. So last weekend, I attended a Utah Rotary event with the keynote speaker, John Durham. And John Durham was the immediate past president of International Rotary. And he shared an acronym. He said, TEAM stands for Together, Everyone Accomplishes More. And I really related to that. I'm like, wow. So this acronym reminded me that we can be engaged as students through student engaged learning. So student engaged learning, or SEL, is when students work as a group to solve real world issues, with faculty serving as our mentors in limited capacity. This allows students to take charge of their educational experience by voicing opinions, sharing insights and experiences in lectures, class assignments, and helping with events such as this one. Since 2011, students here at Utah Valley University, through the Utah Mountain International Forum, have advocated for mountain communities, some of the most neglected communities in the world. We have worked to strengthen the voice of the mountain communities in Kyrgyzstan, Yemen, Guatemala, Mexico, Colombia, China, Taiwan, and locally. Utilizing the SEL model, we advocate for disease eradication, address climate crisis, push for gender equality, promote the inclusion of mountain women and families in policy decisions, and bring communities quality education. Our work with the United Nations, Rotary, and other international organizations has shown that initiatives like these are not limited to those working in this field. On endpolio.org, the official website for Rotary End Polio Initiative, you find events, ideas based to help raise awareness for eradicating polio. So some of the events ideas include having a walk or a run to end polio, having a concert or a watch party. Our influence doesn't end there though. As students, we have friends, classmates, and colleagues who want to get involved, but don't know what first steps to take. The Student Engaged Learning Program has taught me that the simple invitation is the first step, and then the second is to follow up with them. We as students can provide new perspectives and innovations to many of the issues our world faces today. As you can see, students of all ages and community members of all ages can work together to advocate
You alone make the difference.
I really want to thank you all so much for being here. We're going to hear from Spencer just really briefly about your contributions from Orem London. And we really do appreciate all that you have done for our Rotary Club here. Sure, you all know him very well, but Spencer began his financial service practice in 1979 and has served families with their financial planning needs. He holds the Chartered Financial Consultant, Chartered Life Underwriter, and Chartered Special Needs Consultant designations, and is working with families with children with disabilities and other special needs. Spencer has been an active member of Orem London Rotary Club for 35 years and is currently serving as Orem London's president. Thank you, Spencer.
So those of you who know me about what I'm about to say, but I'm gonna make this really short. I know we're timing this out, and I just want to highlight a couple of facts about polio in the world and Rotary International's influence in the eradication of polio. Rotary International was founded in 1917, and the first service project that was done with that club in Illinois was to build a public restroom, as many of you know, small public restroom in a public place. It cost $26.50, and the Rotarians made that happen. Right now, Rotary International has 1.4 million members. I'm sorry, yeah. And in 1985, they decided that they were going to make an influence in polio. So in 1985, they launched Polio Fluff, a global effort to raise funds to contribute to the eradication of immunized people throughout the world. In 1988, so 85 is when Rotary got started with polio. In 1988, polio paralyzed 1,000+ children worldwide every day. That's just so imagine me. The $26.50 that Rotary members contributed way back then was increased, and for polio eradication, members have contributed more than $2.1 billion to help get this disease off the planet. And our little club is a part of that. It's not often that you can feel like you are so insignificant, but be a part of something that is. And that's what the little Orem Rotary Club, when I started as a club member so many years ago, polio was still a big thing in the world, and it was far from being eradicated, and it was good for us. There are several here that were members way back then when this whole thing started, and it has given us an opportunity to, little community in the world to be a part of something significant. Right now, Rotary International is committed to investing $50 million a year to continue this process to get this vaccine to all the world and get this herd immunity down. Alone, we can only do a little bit. But through being affiliated with an organization like this, we can go a long way to making the world a better place. And I'm grateful for all of you here who are interested in doing good, either specifically with polio or just doing a little bit, joining together and making a difference. And thank you for all of you for whatever contributions you are making or will make in the future. And we still have work to do, obviously, but we're getting close. And now is the time to keep the heat on and keep the pressure going and get this in our rearview mirror as quick as possible. Thank you.
To close out our meeting really quickly, I just would like to present a few gifts on behalf of UVU Rotaract to our presenters today, like we did for Dr. Johnson. So we have 3 gifts, one for you, Spencer, one for you, Lily, and then one for you, Rachel. Okay. Spencer, thank you so much for all of your support for here at UVU. And we also want to thank all of our wonderful Rotarians for being here today and all the support that you give us, allowing us to do what we do best. So thank you so much. As you leave today, if you have any questions, specific for Dr. Johnson, I'm in contact with him, so you can give me those questions. I can shoot them out to him. But if you have any other questions, self, speakers, or Spencer, of course, we're always open. But again, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it.
I'll end it.
Thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, maybe.
I'll end it for everyone, Rachel.
Oh, okay, thank you.
There was 2 machines on the second floor. The white one.
Thanks again, Rachel. Take care. And happy birthday.
Thank you.